Here is the first topic of your script, written in English, with a minimum of 800 words, in a continuous and flowing style, based on Owen Hermstring's book, The Law Behind the Laws. The first stirring, when awareness begins to separate you. There is a moment in life when everything changes, though not outwardly at first. There's no lightning strike, no dramatic event to mark the shift, but internally something stirs. It's the quiet whisper of awareness, the subtle awakening that causes you to question everything you once accepted as truth. This is the first sign of true awakening, and it often appears so gently that most people dismiss it. But those who don't, those who listen, begin to walk a path from which there is no return. This stirring is not about acquiring new knowledge. It's about the disintegration of illusion. You don't wake up because someone gave you the right words. You wake up because you began to see the machinery behind the world you lived in. You notice how people move like patterns, speak like scripts, and behave like echoes. You see how your own actions were largely not yours, and you begin to understand what Owen Hermstring describes in The Law Behind the Laws. Your life does not begin with awareness. It begins again after it. The truly awakened do not arrive at awareness by reading books or attending seminars. Those may serve as catalysts, but the real shift comes from something much deeper and more personal. It might be a moment of great loss, a betrayal, a breakdown, or it might be a quiet evening where you looked out at the world and suddenly felt that it wasn't real, not in the way you thought it was. This moment is the breaking of the spell. Hermstring writes, "The matrix that governs your reality is made of agreements you never consciously made. You agreed to play the role you were handed. You agreed to want what others told you to want. You agreed to hate what they said was evil and chase what they said was good. But awakening is realizing that those agreements were made in your sleep, and now something inside you wants to tear up that contract. This first stage is not peaceful. It is disturbing. You begin to lose interest in things that once brought you excitement, status, trends, approval. You feel disconnected at parties, in crowds, in conversations that seem scripted. You nod and smile, but you're not really there. And slowly, the people around you sense the change. They might say you're distant, colder, not fun anymore. But what's really happening is that you've started leaving the stage of the grand performance. And here lies the danger. Because in this stage, you don't yet have the new answers, you've only shed the old ones. This is what Hermstring calls the void between identities. You're no longer the person you were, but you haven't yet become who you are. And that makes you vulnerable to trying to go back. You try to plug yourself back into the system, pretend it was just a phase, but it's too late. You've seen too much. The curtain has been pulled back. You can never unsee. This is where most people panic. They seek out distractions, new spiritual identities, endless self-help programs, even new addictions disguised as healing tools. But these are just ways of avoiding the silence, because in the silence, the truth speaks, and it says, "You are alone now, because no one else can walk this path for you." But this aloneness is not abandonment. It is initiation. Every awakened soul must pass through the desert, where the voices of the world fade and only the voice within remains. Owen Hermstring writes, "The soul whispers in the quiet you've been taught to fear. That's why most people run. But those who stay, who sit with the discomfort, begin to hear the deeper truths. You realize that success, as the world defines it, was always empty. That love, as the world sells it, was always conditional. That safety, as you chased it, was always an illusion. And so begins the collapse, not of your life, but of the false scaffolding that held it up. There's grief in this stage. Grief for who you used to be. Grief for the relationships that now feel hollow. Grief for the years you spent asleep. But that grief is sacred. It is the fire that burns away the inauthentic. Hermstring calls it the mourning of masks, and only by grieving can you make space for the new. You also begin to feel something else, something terrifying and beautiful. Freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to choose from clarity rather than programming. The freedom to feel without filters, to see without lenses, to act without fear of rejection. And this, more than anything, is what begins to separate you. You can no longer tolerate lies, not just in others, but especially in yourself. You can't pretend to care about things you don't. You can't force yourself into environments that feel dead. You can't be around people who only know how to speak in surface-level tones, so you withdraw. Not because you hate the world, but because you're learning to love truth more than comfort. This is why the truly awakened begin to disappear silently from society, not with bitterness, not with superiority, but with the quiet realization that awakening is not a public event, it's a sacred retreat. You don't vanish because you're lost. You vanish because you're being found by your true self, in silence, in solitude, in stillness. When someone truly begins to awaken, they do not become louder. They do not go around announcing their enlightenment. They begin to see the world differently, and because of that, they begin to act differently, subtly, quietly. But society notices, even if it can't quite explain what it sees. And when society notices someone has left its spell, it doesn't celebrate them, it punishes them. This punishment is rarely direct. It's not a jail cell or a public condemnation. It's more insidious. It starts with social distancing, not in the health sense, but in the emotional and relational sense. Friends stop calling. Family begins to label you as strange. Colleagues speak of you in whispers, not because you've harmed them, but because your presence threatens the narrative they still depend on. As Owen Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, those who awaken become mirrors, and most people would rather break the mirror than see what it reflects. What makes this so difficult is that on the surface you're doing everything right. You may become more peaceful, more compassionate, more honest, but society isn't built on peace, it's built on performance. And when you stop performing, people get uncomfortable. Your refusal to engage in gossip, in status games, in toxic patterns, makes others feel judged, even when you say nothing. You haven't changed them, you've only changed yourself. But your transformation exposes their stagnation, and for many that's intolerable. Hermstring points out that this is why spiritual teachers, philosophers, and awakened individuals throughout history have often been exiled, ridiculed, or even killed. They don't fit. Not because they're evil or disruptive, but because they operate from a law that supersedes the collective agreement, and societies, like organisms, will always reject what they perceive as foreign, even when that foreign element is truth. Think of how society defines success. Money, recognition, power, prestige. The awakened individual sees these not as goals, but as traps. They understand that the more one is entangled in the system's rewards, the harder it is to see the bars of the cage. So they disengage, they downsize, they simplify, and when they do, society interprets that as failure, as regression. Hermstring writes, "To the asleep, the awakened always look like they're falling. The punishment continues when you try to speak. At first, you may feel compelled to share what you've discovered. You want to help. You want to open others' eyes, but you quickly learn that most don't want to be awakened. They want to be reassured. They don't want the truth. They want a better version of the lie. And if you persist, you will be mocked, labeled a conspiracy theorist, a pessimist, a dreamer, a fool, not because your words are untrue, but because they threaten the dream. This is why many awakened souls go silent, not out of defeat, but out of wisdom. They realize that truth must be lived, not preached. That transformation is not about convincing, it's about embodying. Hermstring says, the awakened don't argue with the dream, they simply stop participating in it. This withdrawal is not cowardice, it is sovereignty, and it is often misread as arrogance, depression, or madness. There's another layer to this punishment, and it's internal, because you were raised in the same society. You were taught the same scripts, and even as you awaken, the echoes of those teachings remain. You may begin to feel guilt for not wanting what others want, shame for not fitting in, fear that your path is selfish or meaningless, but this is not your truth speaking. It's the residue of your conditioning, and if you're not careful, it will pull you back into the sleep. This is why Hermstring emphasizes the importance of what he calls sacred isolation, a period where you allow yourself to be misunderstood, where you give yourself permission to walk alone, where you learn to trust the quiet voice within more than the loud noise without. In this isolation, you begin to see that the punishment is not personal. It's systemic, it's not about you, it's about what you represent. And when you stop trying to fix that perception, you finally become free. You also begin to see the compassion hidden within the system's rejection. Because the sleep is comfortable, it protects, it soothes, and not everyone is ready to leave it. When you awaken, you must respect that timing, not judge it, not interfere, but be patient. And if one day someone knocks on your door, lost and searching, you'll know how to welcome them because you remember what it felt like when no one welcomed you. This is the paradox. Awakening makes you invisible to the world, but deeply connected to the source of all things. You lose status but gain clarity. You lose approval but gain peace. And in time you realize that this punishment was really a purification. The fire burned away everything that wasn't you, and what remains is something society can't control, so it fears it. But you no longer fear that fear, you carry it like a torch. So let society punish, let them misunderstand, let them walk away, because your path is not about being seen, it's about seeing. And once your eyes have opened, no one can close them again. When someone awakens, they begin to see not just their inner world with clarity, but also the collective patterns that govern society. This awareness doesn't bring applause, it brings resistance, because awakening forces the collective to confront something it has long suppressed, its own shadow. The awakened become, often unwillingly, living mirrors. Their mere presence disturbs others, not because of what they say or do, but because of what they reveal. Their clarity exposes confusion. Their peace reveals the anxiety others mask. Their truthfulness reflects the compromises most people make daily just to survive within the system. This is not metaphorical. As Owen Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, people will resent the clarity of a mirror when they've invested their lives in a fog. To awaken is to become that mirror, and mirrors get smashed when the image is too painful to bear. Awakening strips away illusions, and illusions are often all that people cling to. Most individuals unknowingly live through borrowed beliefs, generational scripts, societal programs and identities formed from fear, not truth. The awakened soul sees these layers and starts peeling them off. But in doing so, they expose what others are terrified to admit. Their lives may be built on untruths. It's not that society intends to exile the awakened, it's more subtle and primal. Awakening activates discomfort. People start to say things like, "You've changed. You're being too intense. Why can't you just be normal?" They don't realize it's not you they're rejecting. It's the parts of themselves they can't face. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, and project. The awakened embody integration. They confront and accept their shadows. But for those who live in denial, this integrated being is unbearable. They'd rather blame, mock, isolate, or label the awakened than do their own inner excavation. You'll notice this pattern even in popular culture. Movies, books, and media often portray awakened individuals, the mystic, the truth-teller, the rebel, as mad, dangerous, or irrelevant. Why? Because their message is rarely comfortable. It's not what sells. It doesn't affirm the ego. It dissolves it. Hermstring puts it plainly. The greatest threat to a sick system is someone who remembers what health looks like. And health in this sense isn't perfection. It's wholeness. A person who refuses to play the game of shame, control, performance, and fear becomes impossible to manipulate. That's threatening to every institution built on control. That's why the awakened often walk away. Not out of arrogance, not because they think they're better, but because they realize their presence in toxic environments causes more harm than good. Their energy disrupts systems of denial. And sometimes, leaving is the most loving thing they can do. But the isolation isn't just social. It's deeply spiritual. Awakening means detaching from identities, roles, and personas that once felt safe. It's terrifying. It's lonely. You stop relating to conversations about gossip, competition, or superficial success. Your friendships shift. Your career may crumble. Even your family may not understand you anymore. The world doesn't celebrate inner transformation. It celebrates conformity wrapped in spiritual language. It wants the appearance of change without the discomfort real change requires. And that's why, when someone truly awakens, not performatively but profoundly, they start to feel invisible, irrelevant, even abandoned. But this disappearance is sacred. It's not a defeat, it's a transition. Hermstring describes it like this. The awakened do not disappear because they've lost faith in the world. They disappear to remember the truth, so they can one day return as its embodiment, not its preacher. To disappear, then, is not retreat, it's preparation. The awakened are not hiding, they are rerouting, rebuilding. Healing not just themselves, but generations of distortion carried in their DNA, their emotions, and their energetic field. This is spiritual warfare fought in silence, where no medals are given, and few will understand. But here's the paradox. Even though the awakened seem to vanish, their impact grows. Their vibration ripples through the unseen. They touch lives without speaking. Their inner coherence changes rooms. Their choices break ancestral cycles. Their presence, even in absence, is a revolution. So if you've felt the pull to go silent, to walk away, to disappear from the noise, trust it. You are not breaking. You are becoming. And your becoming is exactly what the world is afraid of, and exactly what it needs. When someone awakens to a higher level of awareness, what they gain in clarity, they often lose in connection. Coherence, in the spiritual sense, is alignment, when your thoughts, words, actions, and energy finally harmonize. It is the opposite of fragmentation. You stop playing roles, you stop pretending, you stop saying yes when your soul screams no, you stop wearing masks just to be accepted. And that inner alignment comes at a price few talk about: disconnection. Most social bonds are formed through unconscious agreements. We bond over shared wounds, complaints, illusions, and roles. We stay in relationships because they confirm who we think we are, not because they elevate who we're becoming. Coherence threatens those bonds. It breaks the agreement. It says, I will no longer participate in my own suppression, just to keep this dynamic alive, and that scares people. Owen Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, when your frequency rises, your relationships will either rise with you or collapse under their own weight. That's not philosophy, that's physics. Coherence is an energetic shift. It is measurable. And when you become coherent, you no longer resonate with what once felt familiar. That includes friends, lovers, even family. It's not that others become enemies, it's that the unspoken contracts between you dissolve. The one where you were always the caretaker, the one where you stayed small to make someone else feel comfortable, the one where you absorbed dysfunction because that's just how they are. When you awaken, you no longer have the bandwidth to carry what isn't yours. And those around you may not understand. They might say you've changed, you've become cold, distant, selfish. But what they're really feeling is the discomfort of coherence. Your boundaries feel like betrayal to those who benefited from your lack of them. Your truth feels like violence to those who depended on your silence. Your calm feels like superiority to those who still live in chaos. And this is where the pain enters. Because even when you know that coherence is right, it doesn't make the losses easier. You grieve the old bonds, the laughter that was real, the memories that mattered. You wish you could take them with you. But awakening isn't a group trip. It's a solitary pilgrimage. And sometimes to stay coherent, you have to walk alone. Hermstring emphasizes, you cannot drag people into coherence. You can only embody it, and let that be the invitation. But most people aren't ready for that invitation. They'd rather reject you than confront themselves. They'd rather mock your clarity than admit their confusion. And so the awakened are pushed to the margins. Not violently, quietly, subtly, a missed call, a cancelled dinner, a joke made behind your back. And yet, despite the loneliness, you keep going. Because coherence is no longer a choice, it's a necessity. Once you've tasted alignment, you can't go back to fragmentation. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unfeel what you know. And so you shed, you release, you disappear. Not because you hate the world, but because you can't lie to it anymore. The most heartbreaking truth, some of the people you love the most will never know the real you. They knew the version of you that was palatable, that played along, that didn't rock the boat. But the awakened you, the coherent you, that version is too confronting, too radiant, too awake, and so you become the myth in their story. The one who went weird, who lost themselves, who isolated. They won't understand, and they're not meant to. Their perception of you isn't your responsibility. Your coherence is, but not all is lost. Because as Hermstring writes, when you become coherent, your resonance becomes your filter. What is false will fall away, but what is true will find you, effortlessly, and it does, slowly, magically. The more you live in alignment, the more aligned people start showing up. Not because you chase them, but because you no longer block their arrival with the noise of your old self. These new connections are quieter, deeper. You no longer bond over wounds, you bond over truth. You no longer entertain masks, you meet soul to soul. And the irony is, when you no longer need connection to validate your worth, you begin to attract the connections that actually honor it. Coherence is costly. It will dismantle everything that isn't real. But what remains, and what emerges, will be worth it. So if you're walking through the shedding, the silence, the confusion of letting go, hold steady. You're not losing everything. You're losing the lies. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. Because the more aligned you become, the less you fit into places that were built on pretending. To understand why the awakened disappear, we must understand the system they are awakening from. Not a political system, not a religious one. A vibrational one. Society operates within an energetic bandwidth, a narrow range of frequencies rooted in fear, comparison, distraction, and scarcity. And that frequency is not accidental. It is curated, protected, monetized. The moment you awaken, you become energetically incompatible with the system, not because you rebel against it, but because you no longer feed it. Your silence, your presence, your detachment from drama, your refusal to buy into illusions, all of that represents a threat to a system that depends on your fragmentation. As Owen Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, a distracted soul is a profitable customer. The system needs you seeking, needing, comparing, striving, buying. It is not interested in your peace. Peace doesn't sell. Confusion does. Fear does. Addiction to validation does. That's why the most disruptive force in today's world isn't violence. It's coherence, alignment, stillness. Every awakened individual becomes a signal jammer. Your inner frequency starts disrupting the outer noise. You don't play along with guilt marketing. You don't respond to emotional manipulation. You stop outsourcing your authority to experts, gurus, influencers. You question everything, not out of cynicism, but out of clarity. And the system doesn't know what to do with that. Energetic interference happens not just in institutions, but in the very architecture of modern life. Social media is a massive vibrational field optimized for cortisol, dopamine spikes, and tribal division. It's not about connection, it's about consumption. The longer you're emotionally unsettled, the more you scroll. The more you scroll, the more data you give. The more data you give, the more you're sold. Hermstring makes this painfully clear. You are not the customer. You are the product. And the product must remain unconscious to stay profitable. So when you stop playing, the system starts pushing back. It begins subtly. You feel out of place at your job. Not because the work is beneath you, but because it's no longer in resonance with your truth. Meetings feel performative. Small talk becomes unbearable. You notice how much energy goes into pretending, into looking busy, into posturing, into saying what's expected. The charade exhausts you. Because when you're awake, artificiality drains you more than effort ever did. Then it spreads to your lifestyle. You realize how much of what you consume, from fashion to entertainment, is not a reflection of your essence, but of your programming. You stop craving new gadgets. You become disinterested in headlines. Your inner life becomes richer than the external stimulation, and so you disconnect, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. But society doesn't want to lose you quietly. It wants to shame your shift. You've changed. You've become distant. Why are you always so serious? The awakened are cast as misfits, loners, conspiracy theorists, antisocials. Their calm is rebranded as coldness. Their clarity is mistaken for arrogance. Their sovereignty is labeled defiance, but make no mistake, this is not a misunderstanding. This is strategic disempowerment. Because the moment people realize they are energetic beings, that their frequency determines what they attract, what they perceive, what they tolerate, the system starts to crumble. No external force can enslave an internally aligned human being. And so the culture mocks what it fears. It turns spiritual clarity into memes. It dilutes awakening into aesthetic trends. It packages transcendence into marketable self-help content. Watered down and stripped of danger. That's why the truly awakened vanish. Not because they're too enlightened to engage, but because they see through the noise. They recognize the vibrational traps. They feel the energetic weight of every interaction. and they choose to preserve their field, not out of superiority but out of survival. Hermstring warns, energy is the first language, and the system is fluent in yours, even when you're not. That's the real war, not of politics, but of frequencies. A war between resonance and manipulation, between stillness and stimulation, between truth and narrative. And yet, even in their withdrawal, the awakened send ripples. They become invisible disruptors. Their very being challenges others to reflect, to question, to pause. That's why you'll often find them in quiet places. Nature, small towns, remote villages, off-grid cabins. Not because they're hiding, but because they've chosen energetic sovereignty over social inclusion. The most revolutionary act today is to own your frequency and protect it, to stop participating in systems that diminish your signal, to refuse roles that shrink you, to walk away from connections that mute your truth, and to do it all without explanation. The system cannot profit from what it cannot reach, and it cannot reach those who are no longer hungry for what it sells. That is why the truly awakened disappear. The first thing most people don't expect about awakening is the loneliness. Not the surface kind, the kind that craves company or social interaction, but a deeper, more disorienting kind, a soul-level silence, a disconnect not just from people, but from who you once were, from the identity that fit perfectly inside the world you no longer recognize. This stage is what Owen Hermstring refers to in The Law Behind the Laws as the vibrational exile, the point at which your inner frequency rises so far beyond your former resonance that the life around you begins to dissolve. Friends don't call back. Conversations feel shallow. Places that once brought comfort now feel energetically heavy. It's not personal, it's vibrational. When you awaken, you don't just change your thoughts, you shift your entire field. Your frequency becomes a new address, and everything in your life that doesn't match that address either transforms or exits. People you thought would be there forever fade without conflict. Projects collapse despite your effort. Habits fall away overnight. You feel like a stranger in your own skin, and your old world stops recognizing you. This is the valley between two realities. On one side, there's your old life, predictable, familiar, full of roles that earned you approval. On the other side, there's the life that calls your soul, uncertain, quiet, invisible to most. And between them lies the exile, where you belong nowhere, speak less, trust less, feel more, a place of shedding, a place of silence, a place where even your prayers feel like echoes in a cave. It's in this vibrational exile that many people make the mistake of going back to their old crowd, their old beliefs, their old rhythms, just to feel something again, to escape the void. But the awakened cannot unawaken. You can revisit your past, but it will no longer fit. Your soul won't shrink back into it without screaming. As Hermstring warns, once the veil lifts, you cannot pretend it never did. But you can silence your knowing, and that silence is more painful than any exile. So you endure. You sit in the solitude. You stop asking to be understood. You let people misinterpret your stillness as arrogance, your withdrawal as depression. You stop explaining your silence and start honoring it. You stop defending your peace and start protecting it. And here's the paradox. It's in this sacred withdrawal that the true reconnection begins. Because vibrational exile is not a punishment, it's a purification, a stripping away of everything that wasn't yours to carry. The loneliness is not a signal of error, but of elevation. It means your signal has grown too strong to remain in echo chambers, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to attract differently. You meet someone who feels you before they know you. A stranger says something that answers a question you've been holding in silence. A book falls off a shelf. A mentor appears. A creative spark returns. These are not coincidences, they are vibrational alignments, life responding to your new frequency, not with applause, but with resonance. You realize that connection never required crowds. It required clarity. That intimacy was never about proximity. It was about shared energy. And that belonging is not a place. It's a feeling that returns when you're no longer betraying yourself to be accepted. Hermstring puts it beautifully. The awakened are never truly alone, only temporarily out of phase with the noise. And it's true. The more you settle into your new signal, the more your life begins to reorder itself around it. You stop craving understanding and start embodying truth. You stop looking for mirrors and start becoming the light. You stop running from solitude and realize this is where the divine speaks loudest. Eventually, the exile ends. Not because you go back, but because you rise high enough to see that your path was never meant to be crowded, that your tribe isn't found, it's revealed through alignment, that your purpose doesn't shout, it whispers through peace, and that the loneliness you feared was not abandonment, it was initiation. You were never lost. You were being retuned. The silence was not emptiness, it was space for something higher to enter. And when it does, you realize why you disappeared. You weren't escaping the world, you were becoming the signal it was waiting for. One of the most deceptive stages on the path to full awakening is the comfort of the half-awakened state. It feels like freedom, looks like growth, and sounds like wisdom. But beneath its polished exterior lies a subtle trap, one that Owen Hermstring describes in The Law Behind the Laws as the velvet prison of spiritual ego. It is the phase where the soul has glimpsed the truth but hasn't yet surrendered fully to it. And so, it builds a comfortable halfway house between the illusion and the real. The half-awakened person speaks the language of awakening fluently. They understand concepts like frequency, alignment, manifestation, shadow work. They may quote Hermstring, Jung, or Lao Tzu. They've seen behind the veil, but instead of continuing the descent into the unknown, they decorate the threshold and call it home. Why? Because full awakening demands death, not physical, but energetic. The death of identity, of image, of every version of self built to survive in the world of approval, applause, and attachment. It asks for the end of the story you've told yourself for decades. And for many, that cost is too high. So they settle for the middle ground. They keep one foot in each world. They meditate but still crave validation. They speak of letting go, but fear being unseen. They post about their growth, but secretly hope others notice it. They seek to help others awaken, not because they've transcended the ego, but because the ego found a new costume. The healer, the guide, the awakened one. Hermstring warns, the ego doesn't die when you awaken. It mutates. And in its cleverest form, it convinces you that you're free, while keeping you deeply attached to being seen as someone who is. The half-awakened build beautiful prisons. They surround themselves with language that makes them sound enlightened, but use that language to avoid deeper truths. They confuse intellectual understanding with transformation. They analyze their wounds instead of feeling them. They speak of letting go while tightly gripping their curated image. This stage is seductive because it brings rewards. Your circle may admire you, your content may go viral, you may feel spiritually superior to those still asleep. But inside, you know something's off. The peace doesn't last. The joy feels performative. And despite all your knowledge, the same patterns keep showing up. That's the cost of the half-awakened state. You know enough to see the matrix, but not enough to leave it. You're awake enough to feel the tension, but not surrendered enough to release it. And so many stay here, not out of ignorance, but out of fear. Because beyond this point, there is no map, no audience, no guarantee. Just the abyss, the deep internal dismantling that real transformation demands. The void where no one claps, no one validates, and no one sees you, because you are finally shedding what was never truly you. Hermstring challenges this directly. If your awakening still centers you as the hero, it's not awakening, it's branding. Real awakening dethrones you from your own story. And that's the paradox. To truly awaken, you must disappear. First from the roles, then from the noise, then from yourself. You must let the ego grieve its death. You must lose your brilliance to find your light. You must stop trying to be somebody and start becoming nobody. But here's the hope. What waits on the other side is not annihilation. It's freedom. When you walk through the illusion instead of decorating it, you find something the ego can't imitate. Peace without an audience, love without conditions, joy without performance. The world may not applaud this version of you. It may not understand your silence. It may even call your stillness a regression. But you'll know the truth by how light it feels to carry yourself, how quiet your mind becomes, how unnecessary your masks begin to feel, True awakening doesn't need to be seen, it needs to be lived, and that requires you to leave the comfort of half-light and walk into the full unknown, alone, stripped, unapplauded, because only there can you become what you were always meant to be, not a persona, not a performance, but a presence, silent, certain, unshakable. In a world obsessed with visibility, the greatest act of power is often not to be seen, but to step back, quietly, completely, without explanation. This isn't escapism. It's the conscious withdrawal from a system that thrives on performance, reaction, and identity. According to Owen Hermstring, this disappearance is not the end of awakening, but the final and most radical act of it. To disappear does not mean vanishing into obscurity or rejecting society in bitterness. It means detaching from the mechanisms that keep the soul fragmented. When a person disappears in the awakened sense, they are no longer sourcing identity, worth, or reality from the external world. They stop trading their energy for applause, their presence for performance, and their time for approval. Disappearance, then, is reclamation. Hermstring writes, "The most powerful are not the ones who scream their truth, but those who live it so fully, they no longer need to speak it." This is where true silence begins, not as the absence of words, but as the absence of the ego's hunger to be validated, understood, or even known. To disappear is to choose wholeness over recognition. It is to walk away from the stage, not because the play ended, but because you finally understood it was all an illusion. The spotlight was never real, the audience was never yours, and the role you played was only ever a mask. Many fear this step. After all, we are conditioned to believe that influence is power, that reach is impact, that visibility is meaning. But the awakened know the opposite is true. The deeper you awaken, the less you crave to be known, because you've touched something more vast than personality, presence itself. Hermstring describes this shift in terms of energetic sovereignty. In The Law Behind the Laws, he says, "When you no longer leak your energy trying to control perception, you begin to emit a field that reshapes reality. This is why the truly awakened often vanish from public spaces, not because they reject humanity, but because they've stopped needing to shape it with force. Their alignment becomes enough. They live in what Hermstring calls energetic anonymity. Their power is no longer measured in likes, shares, influence, or even teachings. It is felt in their silence, their gaze, their stillness. Their absence even speaks. They become living frequencies, no longer people trying to awaken others, but embodiments of what awakening actually is. And here lies the paradox. The more awakened you become, the more invisible you appear. The less noise you need, the less argument you engage, the fewer explanations you offer. Your life becomes your message, and that message doesn't shout, it resonates. The truly awakened disappear not because they are hiding, but because they are found, and they know that the systems around them cannot sustain the weight of their presence without distorting it. So they walk away, not with anger, but with love, with clarity, with finality. This disappearance is not weakness, it's the highest form of power. It is the refusal to be used, consumed, interpreted, or reduced. It is the liberation from performance, the ending of story, the death of identity. In Hermstring's own words, the awakened don't burn bridges. They dissolve the need for bridges entirely. They become the space between. This is the final dissolution of separation. No longer bound by titles, roles, or expectations, they become what they were always meant to be, a mirror of the eternal, unseen but unmissable. So if you wonder where the truly awakened have gone, the answer is simple. They have not gone anywhere. They have become everything. And in doing so, they no longer need to be found. Because the awakened don't want followers. They want freedom. They don't seek to lead. They seek to become so free that their presence alone gives others permission to free themselves. And when their work is done, when their frequency has spoken louder than their words ever could, they step back, silently. If this message resonated with you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe and leave a comment below. Have you ever felt the call to disappear quietly? Let's awaken together, in silence, in truth.